Welcome back to my series, Painting the Same Location 3 Ways. In the last episode, I painted a silhouetted view of my favorite beach in Washington, Scenic Beach. And this time I'm taking another reference photo from that location and focusing my skills on painting the water of that beach. You might assume that because the word water is in the name of the medium, that painting water in watercolor is really straightforward. But in fact, it's a subject matter that a lot of people struggle with. And it's only really recently that I've become comfortable and confident in painting water. These are the reference photos I'm going to use. For this one, I'm going to be using the shapes of the mountains and mimicking that. And then this reference photo is going to be what I use for the general colors of my water. This is such a peaceful view, and that's really what I want to capture with these rippling waves. This is a video that I highly recommend you try out. Grab a paintbrush, grab some paper and paints, because I guarantee you can come away with a painting that you feel proud of. So let's try it out. I'm doing this painting in 3 sections. I'm starting with the sky, which I'm going to put in a blue, ultramarine blue, and then use a lifting technique to get the cloud shapes near the mountains. There are a lot of different ways that you can paint clouds, and there are a lot of amazing tutorials on the internet for that. This is one that I really like to use, where I take toilet paper and bunch it up kind of irregularly and then use it to lift the blue and make pretty organic cloud shapes. I've tried this technique out using various materials, including paper towel, including little bits of sponge. I find that toilet paper works the best for this, or Kleenex, because you get really rough, irregular edges that match the organic shapes of clouds better. Whereas paper towel, when you kind of bunch it up and fold it up, you get harder folds. So that's a good thing to try out and play around with, and see what kind of shapes you can get out of it. You can see I'm kind of twisting and turning the paper towel or the toilet paper in various angles to get different cloud shapes. I want them not to be all uniform. And that's it for the sky. I let that dry before moving on to my bottom section of the water. If we look back at this reference photo, the water has a lot of variation of color. And I want that richness to kind of continue in this first wash of the water. So there's some green in there as we get closer to the bottom, closer to the viewer, where there's, rocks and sand showing through, as well as darker blues and turquoises and teals as we move back. So I'm laying down this green gold as well as Prussian blue, and I'm going to be adding in some Cobalt teal, which is actually one of my favorite paint colors. It's really aggressive, so a little goes a long way, but it's just so vibrant and rich, and really really shows how vibrant and beautiful this water is in real life. I'm working this whole area wet and wet as my base layer. I'm just laying down the color and letting them kind of meld and mix before I add the texture of the waves. Now that it's dry, you can see on either side of that water that there are these little blooms that happened. I wasn't super careful while I was drying this, and that's fine, again, because all of it's going to be covered up with the waves. I'm going in with kind of a mixture of Prussian blue and ultramarine blue to do the layers of my clouds. I'm using atmospheric perspective rules here, which means that the mountains in the farthest distance are going to be the lightest color, and they're going to be the bluest all the way to purple. Sometimes I'll do that. And as the land masses get closer to the viewer, they're going to get darker and greener. That really helps show the depth of how far back these mountains are going. You can see in layering, I'm doing the entire mountain area, all one color, letting it completely dry, going over with my next medium shade that's a tiny bit greener and darker, letting that dry, and then going in with my darker layers, and then finally the darkest layer. I could have decided to paint each separate mountain separately. I could have decided to paint each section of the mountain separately based on the different depth I'm trying to show, but this is a nice way to make sure that everything gets really uniform and there aren't any um, built up edges, or I don't accidentally spill over a layer. And that's why I painted the entire thing that lightest blue first, and then just work to build up those darker colors on top of it. And now we're moving on to my favorite part of this painting, which is the rippling waves. I have another video painting misty and rippling waves in watercolor where I go really in depth with this process, but I'll talk about it again here. It is such a fun kind of like trick of the eye that if you can make these worm shapes with tails on either end, you can make water look really cool in watercolor. So what I'm doing is I'm having these shapes, I'm going to call them worms, where I start really light with the tip of my brush, push down harder with the belly of the brush, and then lift up and go lightly with the tip again at the end, the other side of the worm. So we start light with the tail, push down harder, and then lift and go light again to make another tail on either side of these worms. Worms, I mean, okay, they kind of look like schools of fish before I add in all the details, but if you stick with it and have patience, it will end up looking really spectacular. And I truly believe if you can do worm shapes like this, and then I'll talk about adding eyeliner to the worms. If you can paint worms and add eyeliner to the worms, you can paint water in watercolor, guaranteed. As I go farther back to show distance, those worm shapes get smaller and smaller. All the way to the very back, I'm pretty much just dotting in little dots, or even doing dry brush to get those tiny ripples without detail. You can see as I'm painting these worms, I'm not letting any of the tails touch. There will be a little bit of overlap as I add details, but that background wash is super important to maintain because that is your lightest section, the highlights of the waves where the sun is reflecting off of those. And then the worms and their eyeliner and all of that dark is going to be the shadows of those waves that are blocking the sun and giving that really almost realistic detail. I feel insane saying worms with eyeliner, but I really think this is the way to describe it. So here I go with a slightly darker blue, and I'm adding eyeliner to the tops of my worms. This is where the darkest shadow of the wave kind of bending over is blocking that light and giving shadow and depth. And we're going to build this up a lot, but you can see I'm not going over the entire worm. I'm sticking to the top of that worm and adding a little eyeliner shape to it. I'm adding some kind of horizontal lines in between to get smaller ripples, but again, I'm not covering up that background wash because I want to maintain those lightest highlights. That contrast is key. I'm making sure that I'm going to every wave, every worm, and adding some level of shadow, some level of eyeliner to the top of that worm. Already, it's kind of starting to look like waves, although this process is not done by any means. I love this practice because I really just zone out while I'm doing it. When I looked back at this recording, this painting from start to finish took 26 minutes. And that includes using a hair dryer to dry the layers of my sky, the background of my water, as well as those layers of mountains. I really thought that this took a lot longer, but it did not. It took 26 minutes until I told myself I was done. So while you can just kind of get lost in the zone with doing this particular section of the waves, it really doesn't take that long. You can even just try a tiny square and see if you can get this technique to work for you. I'm adding indigo to my shadow color. And again, this is layer 3. So this is layer 2 of eyeliner, layer 3 total over top of the background wash. I'm going in with darker shadows under the lips of those little waves. I'm adding in some horizontal smaller ripples, but I'm not covering everything up. I'm leaving some of that light color in between. I know I'm repeating myself, but again, this is a repetitive process. And I'm going to do more layers of building up. I think at this point, I probably could have stopped and been satisfied with it. But I will go over and add some darkest darks. I've said this in my other videos, but a really good practice for doing this type of water is to stand back, squint your eyes, get a feel for the shapes and the balance. Do you need to add any more shadow to kind of balance out the composition? If you squint your eyes, is there just one clump of dark on one side of the painting, or is it pretty evenly spread out without being too repetitive or too symmetrical or something like that? I'm really wrapping up here. I'm nearly done. I'm just doing those finishing touches where I'm deciding if there's any other shadow that needs to go in. And we're done with this painting. I was extremely happy with how this came out. This was so fun to paint, really relaxing. I highly recommend you try painting water waves this way. And most importantly, it makes me feel like I'm at this location that I love so much. Have a great day.